guess, yeah,
Here we are.
here we are. We,
We got internet in this place for the first time in a really long time. It's
like,
pretty wild.
maybe up to 6 months, huh?
Yeah, you went from absolutely nothing to like pretty high speed. It's kind of crazy.
hmm Yeah, in the last year, I've had uh, the acquisition of fiber optic internet, and it is the craziest thing that I've ever experienced. But
Yeah.
we won't bore the people with that. I think what we should do is get right into the story first, and then I think we talk about um, some of the, I guess, things that you've learned by really managing that property. And I think it's just a cool situation. So, Keith,
hmm
Keith's going to tell the story of the buck that he shot this season, which was on private land, but I guess talk
This is the
maybe
one.
real briefly about the land, just so people have an idea of like what. So they're not like, oh,
hmm
private, I'm not listening.
Yeah, exactly. I've had a lot of coffee, and so I'll try not to get ahead of myself here too much. And I haven't really told the story extensively too much, so I'll try to stay behind myself a little bit.
It's
So
okay, dude. You're talking to the most long-winded character of all time, so. Which people probably know that at this point, and I know you do.
yeah, so this property, pull these off a little bit. This property that I met this person where I'm living out here in Southern Ohio in 2019. He just needed someone to work on his property just to help him with some stuff. I volunteered, and he's an older guy. He has about 100 acres, and volunteered to just help him for a summer doing a lot of work for him, mostly around his house. And then I learned that he had this EQIP contract, which is a federal funding for invasive brush management, um, for a 20-acre piece of his property. And basically just told him that I'm absolutely willing to do that, and I really like wanted to be a part of that project. He had people come out and look at it, and like people weren't getting back with him because it's 20 acres of just like completely infested, just old field. It was pastured in the 60s, and it's just been growing back, and like just some crazy. If you live in this region of the country, you kind of know what it probably looks like.
But a lot of
Um,
invasive.
yeah, a lot of just like you couldn't even walk through it, like except for in the winter. You'd try to go in there in the summer, and it was just completely impassable. 20 acres of this real skinny ridgetop. Um, so in 20 early 2020, January 2020, I started cutting into the ridge. The first thing I did was just take the chainsaw and just run down the ridge and make several trail systems that I could run down. And then that summer, I started doing like the actual brush management, which is just a lot of cutting and or spraying, and I've just been doing that for several years. Um, I'm taking a lot of before and afters, and hopefully we'll be able to mix those in to this podcast as it goes. But fast forward a couple of years, and it's progressed quite a bit since then, and it's starting to see this actual restoration of like actual native plants and stuff coming back, and deer activity is not that they weren't using it, but it was being used in a lot different ways. And now they're just using it as much more of a full ecosystem, and
And like
it's
a full
been
year
yeah,
residence, I guess.
yeah, and it's been really really cool watching. I really like watching the plant part of it too, and just watching the plant communities restore, but watching how the um, deer and small birds and even like turkeys and stuff have been starting to use it. Uh, but yeah, so I've been hunting there for a couple of years. When the first time I walked up there, I found a shed laying right where the trail is laying there now, and I kind of knew it was always topographically it's like a good spot. It's a high point. It has roads right on the each side of it, but it sits way above these different pastures, and deer can just pop down to different points of the surrounding areas really easily. But have never really had any like close encounters with anything there. I didn't hunt there much in the past several years, and this year I made it a pretty specific goal to try to shoot a buck out there, and I knew it was very possible. I just didn't know exactly where it was going to be at. I have one real junky muddy trail camera that I like to just run on different parts just to see how deer and everything are using that place.
How many acres is it total?
It's 100. It's like 90, 99 or something like that. But it's real skinny. It's basically just this skinny ridge that runs up, and the 20 acres that's in this contract is the very peninsula at this point. It's a pretty cool, pretty unique area just because of like the soil, and it's rocky and steep. So there's different stuff going on out there compared to different parts of his property. It's a lot shrubbier and more open and sparse type of stuff.
The contract area specifically.
Yeah, because of the land history, it's just different from the other 80 acres essentially. The first year I hunted in there in 2019, I did a couple hunts in there. There was like a bachelor group living on just below that ridge, and I like bumped a buck the first year and didn't spend as much time in there. Ended up just hunting other places, got opportunities of different deer. But this year I spent a lot of time in October hunting a couple different spots. Had a couple encounters with like little bucks, I guess, but I knew there were 3 or 4 pretty nice bucks around, and it was just like I knew that.
From your camera or sign or just past history or a combo?
Sign, and then the camera, I had put it on this gas well road that just runs pretty much the entire length of the ridge, and I could just put it there. And a lot of times in October, when buck activity would be picking up, it was very evident that bucks were using the property frequently. But this year I wanted to learn about more so large scale movement patterns, I guess so, and just like really breaking it down more so. But I also knew that because of, yeah.
Question, like when you say they were using the area frequently, I know you say you've got the one, and I mean, I know of the camera. It's not a real new technology there, but it's probably not the most reliable thing. But when you say you were getting bucks frequently, is this daily? Like I honestly just don't even have an expectation, like daily or weekly, or how's that look?
Several times a week type of thing.
And these are like shooter bucks.
Yeah.
Or just bucks in general.
Bucks in general, but I remember one time 2 years ago I had that camera set up on the gas well road, which is actually not part of that same area. It's like 400 or 500 yards away. Same ridge system. And there were mornings in October where 4 different bucks would be going on that gas road, walking down. I counted on that road, I counted 30 scrapes in a length of 400 yards, something like that on this road. So it was like, I knew they were using it. I just didn't know the exact like bedding locations. And I just wanted to figure that out more this year from just spending a lot more time in there, whether it be bumping deer or whatever it was. So hunted in there quite a bit in October, and felt like I was kind of in the game, but then at times I'd go out there and would just see like the same group of does and would like never really see any of these bigger bucks. I was just seeing like little fork bucks that are coming to these scrapes that I know in years past there's been big bucks on them in these little windows of time. And this one little spot on this ridge, it's like an east facing bowl, runs up to the high point of the ridge. I threw a camera on a big scrape in there the past couple years, and deployed, yeah.
I mean, you got to use the right terms. If you're gonna be on the podcast, you got to use the right terms.
I deployed a game cam on this scrape for a couple of years, and there was between like November, which is, I mean, it's like obvious, between like November 7th and the 14th. Right in that spot was just like super hot spot. And the one year there was the biggest buck that I knew that was around was in there for 6 days straight or something like that, just standing right on that scrape. And it was like, all right, like, it seems like
he might have a doe.
The whole, maybe, the whole like local estrus cycle type thing kind of was pointing to the fact that November 9th to the 12th type thing is a pretty hot time to be right in that spot. And there's always 1 or 2 groups of does that are living right on that ridge, like very consistently. So this year I actually had only hunted on in that 20-acre unit. I think once or once or twice up to that point, pretty seriously. I hung a saddle up in there over one of the biggest scrapes that I knew was in there, and that's when I had just little bucks coming in and cruising in the mornings. And didn't hunt it from like November 2nd, and then went back in on the 12th and pulled up on the evening of the 12th up to the place. It was a northeast wind. We were driving from hunting over at Larry's place in the morning, and I was just like, I'm just gonna throw a hunt out there this evening. It's November 12th type of thing. Didn't really have any plans. I initially planned to go to the completely different side of the property, and for whatever reason was just like, I don't. It's real open woods up there, and I just like my access is going to be weird, and I didn't feel like busting through all that stuff, and I wanted to just hunt in this equip unit anyways, because that's where I wanted to shoot one anyways. Just would mean a lot more to me because of how much I've spent a lot of time out there doing a lot of cool stuff. And ended up just walking. There's a big opening. He's got like a fire pit and mows it. An opening up on top of the ridge right before the peninsula kind of starts. And I walked up there. There's usually a couple scrapes. And got up to that point and I saw one scrape that had fresh doe tracks in it. And it was just like, I didn't necessarily know if I was going to hunt right in that spot. I was just going to check the scrapes, and as soon as I saw those open with these doe tracks that are in them facing right back into this ridge, I was just like, well, it was two, I was around two probably, 130 to 2, something like that. I just slipped 80 yards past that and just set up in this spot where it drops down into this little saddle. And
Is this in that pocket where you said that historically they've been with does during that time frame?
yeah, it's like the upper side. I'm trying to use my hand to explain. There's like this little saddle, and then it drops down into this real thick upper east facing side of this ridge, and it drops down. There's an old cattle pond. It's just a watering hole down in there. It's just like real gnarly down there. And that's the spot where certainly bucks have locked down with does in that spot before. So I got to the upper side of that and had a wind blowing down the ridge, just dropping down to the road on one side. The road was 100 yards away from me, and had a good wind and just got into this pocket set up on the ground with like the way I was set up. Had a little bit of terrain to where it dropped, and then the trail was literally 2 yards off to my left, and then it ran down to where I could shoot to like 15 yards to the low point crossing, and there's a huge scrape down in the middle of that as well, which I didn't even see until afterwards. But sat there for a couple hours, didn't see anything, was kind of losing confidence. Didn't really have a ton of confidence, but I should have had way more type of thing. Where like hindsight, it's like, yeah, everything was set up really well for me. But sat there for a few hours, didn't have anything going on, and I looked up at probably about 4. So this was after time change, so it gets dark at 5. It was 5:42 or something with shooting light. So right around 4, I looked up and saw a lone doe coming down the trail and starting to work towards me. And I thought she was just going to work this trail to where she would have been walking several yards away from me. And she stopped and started browsing. There's an opening on this top of the opening. It's not even very wooded. It's actually, I've got it back to it's looking more like reverted old field. There's goldenrod and stuff growing in this. So she starts pecking around and browsing in this stuff, and eventually drops off the trail, and I can just watch her 50 yards probably, just browsing. And I could hear something off to my left. I could hear just like walking, but I looked over my shoulder at one point, and I could see a squirrel climbing up a tree too. And it was just like, might be a squirrel, but I kept hearing it, and it was just in the back of my mind. But I'm watching this doe, and she just kind of browses her way, drops down the trail, or off the trail, off to like this side of me. And eventually I hear what certainly was a deer at this point, where it's just like something crushing up through like the real thick stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I look up like just over that little crest past the trail, and I just see like just the top of antlers, this thing. And this buck steps out. The first time I see him, he's already at like 25 yards, probably closing towards the trail.
And do, like, just for the sake of following the correct terminology rule, are you throwing nicknames out there? Are you saying, I know that deer? Or are you saying, there he is, hey, that's him? Or
Actually, none of that went through my head at that point. It was just like, it was the kind of thing where it's just like, I knew there were big ones right in that area, and it was just a matter of time before I actually got eyes on one.
Mm-hmm. So you see him and you're like, oh, good.
It's not him, but it's one of them. So I see this thing pop up, and I'm just like, okay, big buck, and I drew immediately because I thought he was just going to close.
How far is he?
And I'd have a shot. 20 to 25 when he pops up through that, and I can only see like the top of his head, so I can only see antlers just moving like this as he's coming up through this stuff. And he stops beside this dead tree, and it gets like real quiet, and I can just barely see antler. And I'm also like still watching this doe, making sure she's not like picking me off at any point. And I remember being drawn and could like not see him, but I was waiting for him to just pop into an opening. And then it's just like silence, like nothing was happening. And it was just like, I knew he was just doing the statue type deal where he gets up into that opening and he's clearly like with this doe, but not right beside her, just like keeping tabs on her. Then he pops up and just like, it's just dead quiet. So I get weird, like when you can't see them, but you know that they're there. Like there's absolutely no way that the thing could have gone anywhere else. It was just a real weird time for like 30 minutes. I'm sitting here, nothing has happened, but the last time I saw him, he's 15 yards from me. And so I'm just like not moving, just like got the bow sitting, I'm on my knees, got the bow like resting on my knee like this. Doe's still, I can hear her and see her every once in a while 50 yards away from me, and nothing's going on. And I definitely grunted super softly a few times just to like, but I had waited a little bit because I didn't want to just hammer one right at him and just not be ready for it. I kind of was just trying to read the situation a little more. So I put the grunt tube like in my armpit, like the end of it, and would just like real softly grunt, and like no response or anything. Didn't even hear him like stand up or like move or anything. So I started feeling kind of weird, and all of a sudden in my head I'm like, is there any way he could have like crossed this trail and ended up like down by this doe more? But it's just like, there's absolutely no way. Like they absolutely can't happen. It'd be 5 yards, I'd see him walk in front of me. So a little bit more time goes by, and I could hear a deer down below me. It drops a little bit steeper off to like way off to my right, and I can hear something moving down past me like this, and I thought it was the doe because I hadn't seen her for a few minutes, and I thought she started moving up the ridge like this, which I thought maybe would pull him past me like this. And I hear this thing walking, and now there's a deer walking behind me back to my right. So I have something that I know is walking back here. I know that this buck is not moved 15 yards from me or whatever, extremely close to me. And I thought maybe it was buck and doe. And I look up at one point and I see the doe pop back out onto the trail where I first seen her. And I'm like, whoa, the doe is still up there, but there's a deer back behind me still. So it's getting pretty dark at this point. 20 minutes till legal light, probably, maybe even less. So like the whole last thing happened in a very short amount of time, but 15 minutes till last light, probably. I tried grunting a few more times, and I had even like done like little, not scraping, but just like trying to be like just like hooves on the ground. And finally it was getting dark enough to where it's like I gotta just like do something super aggressive. So I grunted and snort wheezed, and immediately this deer back to my right is just like coming like right at me. And I was like, okay, that's a buck too. Um, no idea what he was. So it's like maybe this thing's a shooter, but I'm not going to turn on it because I know this buck that is definitely still right here is a big one. So I'm still facing this thing, and I'm like looking over my shoulder like this, and this buck comes up to me. It's real thick and stemmy. There's a bunch of dead brush and stuff around me. This thing comes up to me and is standing like 8 yards away, like just looking through the brush, trying to find me. And like as soon as I had heard, as soon as I heard that, this buck also heard that, and that was enough to be like, okay.
I'm standing up.
To him, it was like, okay, that's a real buck coming at me now. He heard the snort wheeze. He heard something like running up to him. So I'm looking over like this, and I hear this thing run up. And as soon as that happens, this buck up here does like he had done a couple like right before that he had done a couple like real soft like
Rolls.
he was laying down is
And he just
kind of
kind
what
of
I
shifted.
figured out after that. You could tell he just like rolled and would do these real soft grunts. And
Just something
after
like real soft, like almost. Did I really hear that? Like a.
yeah, like you yeah, like you hear it coming from his stomach type thing where it's just like that.
Yeah.
And
Ooh, that's.
this thing runs up, and as soon as he gets like right up to me to where I see him, I'm looking over my shoulder and I hear that thing do like the classic grunt, stand up, and snort wheeze all at the same time. And I'm just
The
like,
one you shot.
yeah,
Jeez.
he does all that. He stands up, and I like look back up like this, and dude, he's literally like 10 yards from like 8 to 10 yards from me, looking straight through me, but like that other buck is standing right behind me. So I have two bucks inside of 10 yards on both sides of me like this. But I'm just like buried in this stuff and I'm not drawn. I had drawn one time before this when I had seen some movement at one point and drew, but that was all. So I drew 3 times total. But this time there's two bucks standing here. It's like 5 minutes from dark at this point, which is like what saved me was the having the darkness as cover. And it's like makes it so much harder for him
Yeah,
to see through that
shadows
stuff.
and contrast gets all skewed when you're in a thick spot
Yeah,
on the ground.
and he's looking at me and he knows that there's something right there, but he can hear this buck still circling back around me like this, and my wind's going like this, and this buck is back here moving like this, and this buck's up here, and like the wind's just like it was thermals were pulling down at that point, but it was like thermals were pulling with what the predominant already was, so it was just like staying consistent like that. And this thing stands up, and I turn back and look at him, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, it's right here. And he like took a couple steps, and it was like where I had seen him, and then like a real thick spot, and then there was like maybe an opening right here, and he like steps off of the trail past that, and I just drew down like this and got it up and was just pointing it through like some pretty thick stuff, but I saw this window, and he stepped right into it, and I had to just like shift like this, and the shot was generously 5 yards, and he's standing there like looking right at me, and several seconds I'm holding it there. I'm just like, I don't know if I can like thread one through that, and I like shifted a couple times and got it on this opening, and I could see the white chest patch, and I could see like his face, chest patch, and then like just below it, and I put the pin right below it. I remember just being like, he's so close, like you gotta just do it type of thing. It's like this is your opportunity. And I shot and felt confident with the shot and everything, and as soon as it hit, it was just that like you could hear it just hit like
Boom.
straight through him. Yeah, like
Yeah.
felt pretty great about it. And he barreled through like crazy gnarly stuff. There's like whole treetops he's just like running through.
That's always
And
a
he
good
like
sign too. You know, if they're just
yeah,
immediately just freaking out.
yeah. So he crashed down, and he crashed. This buck ran at the same time, the one that was right behind me. So they both go like crashing down, and I hear a bunch of commotion. But then I hear that other buck still, because he was right there. That other buck keeps running, which in my head it's like I felt like I definitely heard him crash, but I heard the other one run. So that's like, I'm not going to get too confident yet right now because I heard another deer run off and called Ben immediately. And Ben met me out there like an hour later and we walked. We didn't find
Do you?
any.
Sorry, I gotta interrupt you
Yeah.
here. Do you have the Snapchat saved that you sent me that just said? It was so funny because Jake and I joked about it so much because at this time Jake and I are hunting together, and I get the Snapchat from you, and I just tell Jake like, well, Keith shot one, and he's like, oh yeah, what'd he say? And I'm just like, something about like white patch, super close white patch, hoping for the best. So like at
I
that
don't
point
have
I
it
was
saved,
really
but
confused at your confidence level, and then Jake and I just kept saying hoping for the best because it just like struck us as funny in the moment. It was like
it
one of
was,
your
I
few
mean,
serious, like rarely a serious Snapchat from Keith, and then it's like this is
yeah.
definitely serious, and that's probably what made that simple line of hoping for the best pretty funny to us.
I remember it just being like I've never shot one. It was weird too because he wasn't head on. It was like super quartering too, so he wasn't doing like this. He was like this and facing. So I saw the chest patch and I tried to put it down here where I've shot a couple bucks before, and it was the kind of thing where it's just like I don't know, I feel like if you end up hitting too high or off to one center or whatever, it can get weird. I've learned to be way more confident with the frontals because the
Because you've done it. I mean,
yeah
you've done it more than I
the
have or Jake has, I think. And I, you
the
know,
three yeah I mean the three that I've taken they're dead in 90 yards of
but they're all
running.
really
But
close,
yeah, exactly.
like
Yeah.
inside of 10.
Hmm. Oh yeah. So Ben comes. We don't find blood right off the bat. We walk 20 yards and we see like the first speck and it's just like good blood and I turn. I was kind of immediately just like I almost just want to go to where I heard all that commotion when I had called Ben. That was just like let's follow the trail and we turn at one point and we see blood on trees and stuff and it's kind of immediately just like feeling way better about it. And yeah, we walk down to where it drops, literally right where it drops to the road, and he's laying dead. He had rolled down. He was literally laying to the point where we dragged him down to the road. He was like 5 yards from the road. It was pretty funny, but
That is pretty funny.
we never
Same
found
thing
the
with that
arrow.
buck that I just shot in South Dakota. I don't know if I've told you that or not, but when he goes down, he's like less than 3 yards off the road. In
That makes it
between,
pretty easy.
yeah, between a public private land boundary and the road. Like there was like a 5-6 yard gap between the road and the fence, and it was just an odd corner of private that kind of came in, and he just went
Hmm.
down right in between the corner post and the road. It's ridiculous. It's like, how do you get that lucky? But anyway,
Yeah, that's pretty nice.
yeah,
We never, so we never found the arrow. I still have not found the arrow. So the shot ended up being, I put it below his, like just below that chest patch, and I think he was so close that it ended up just being higher than I would have even anticipated. It's something that I have learned from that is when you do shoot him like that close, it would be different if it was like 10 yards even, but he was 5, and I think my arrow just ended up being a little bit higher.
like that
Yeah.
much maybe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, probably. It ended up just going square through the chest patch, and it exited out the back of his neck, and it just went straight through his neck. So it's like it wasn't the greatest shot for like what it could have been, but it worked extremely well. But if it would have been, like I said, left or right, and it didn't just like sever everything through there,
Hmm.
it wouldn't have been the best.
I mean,
But
that's what happened when I shot that elk. It's exactly the same thing. It's like if you look at a human neck, it's basically like you have to
yeah.
hit inside of this,
Mhm.
because otherwise this is meat.
Mhm.
But if you get in there, you're not recovering from it.
Done. Yeah, that was. I mean, he was definitely expired in less than a minute, I would say, because it was as I was like dialing and calling Ben and like trying to talk to him, I could hear his last couple kicks down there.
Man, he wasn't
But
even down yet, and I had Ben on a line.
Ben, he's dying right now. Oh, but it was probably, I mean, it's the most like proud of shooting a deer that I've ever been, just because of how much time I've spent up there and how much I've like kind of just dreamed of that exact scenario and that exact spot type of thing. Having a mature deer locked down with a doe right in the spot where I've spent countless hours just cutting stuff and kind of rehabilitating this 20-acre piece of property.
And I do believe that you should tell everybody about your living situation and how you kind of lived there for a
I
year.
did.
Yeah.
Yeah, the first summer that I was doing that equip project up there, I was just living in that opening, like right where that scrape was, where the doe tracks were. I had my I had a tent that I didn't even stay in because I didn't like sleeping on the ground. I slept in a hammock for. I was up there for 4.5, 5 months, something like that. It was awesome. It was pretty. I mean, I definitely have a pretty fond connection with that piece of land. It was very fulfilling to have that finally come together. That was a kind of a high point. So after that, I just had to reset a little bit. Didn't really even hunt that much after that because it was just I don't know, a turning point or whatever.
Yeah.
But,
I think one of the things that like is the coolest and what a lot of people don't. I don't know. I was thinking about this in general. Is like Keith's very much a behind the scene. I mean, in front of the scenes, but also behind the scenes, like character of THP has been for years. And like I don't necessarily always know that people really realize how tough and just like creative Keith is, and like the fact that he lived out there is like one of the things that at THP we talk about it all the time. It's like, oh yeah, our homeless buddy Keith that just lived in a permanent primitive campsite essentially, and that's pretty sweet. And I mean definitely helps you learn an area, I'm sure. I mean I'm it's obvious from you telling the story that over time you started to recognize that, hey, this is going to be the spot. So when it happened, I'm
mm-hmm.
sure there's a part of you that's like obviously excited that it came together the way you expected, but also like a confidence boost of, hey, I guessed it right. Like I was right, I
Mm-hmm.
guess. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, it
And
was
there's
like
always that in hunting, but
it was
yeah.
like as I was witnessing it, it's like this is exactly what is happening up here every year type of thing that I guessed, but it's like now I get to actually just see the whole thing go down. I was up there on the perfect day. I'm sure I don't know if the next day if it would have even been remotely the same. I'm sure they probably would have been back in that spot, but like who's to say, type of
Yeah.
thing. So it was
Never know.
being there on the right day, and yeah, everything just kind of fell into the right favor for
And
that hunt.
a couple questions that I have that pop up. Number one is, I don't know that you really explained much about your setup at all. You had mentioned that you had a saddle set up somewhere around at one point, but you were on the ground for all this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the place I had set the saddle up, there was a black oak that was down the hill, probably 100 yards, or not even 80, 100 yards. That's where like that big scrape was, where I've had a camera in the past and had a big one on there for several years. Like I knew they cruise that. It's a real obvious bench, and I made a trail on there. There was no trail. I brought the big industrial mower back there and pushed in a trail so I can actually work out there.
Mm-hmm.
But they use that thing consistently, like they do any bench trail. I had set up there several times in late October, early November, and then for this hunt, I just walked down that trail. It was extremely loose. I just walked down the trail, and I knew of a spot that had a bunch of brush behind me and enough cover right in front of me, and it had like some taller grass right on the edge of the trail that if something were to walk right beside me, I felt like I could tuck into that brush, but also it had like this slight rise to it to where I was like slightly lower, and I felt like I could get below anything that ended up being out in front of me.
Like use the hill as your cover.
A little bit. I took some videos too, so I lay it over, try to make that make sense of like how that looked. And I crept in. It was real dry, real crunchy, and I crept into that spot. I didn't want to push too far because it was dry and calm. So I just got to that spot, took a couple steps, and just did some real light leaf scraping. And it's the setup is still out there. You can walk out there and see my little pothole with no leaves in it. But that was one thing that, like, when that deer was close, I couldn't even. All the leaves around me were so crunchy, and I knew the thing was right beside me. That it's like any little movement that doesn't sound like something he would be like aggressive towards might just make him like get real weird. But I guess so. After I like shot and everything, and even going back the next day and trying to like piece together what he was even doing, pretty much 100% confident that he'd walked up right to that trail and just bedded right in the middle of that trail for 30 minutes. Because he popped up, I'd seen the antlers, and then the last thing I saw was like a tuft of grass on my side of the trail, like 8 yards from me, just go like this, and then nothing from that point. So it's like I'm pretty sure he just got to that trail, stood there for a long time, and then probably just laid down because that doe was right within sight of him. And that's why he really didn't have a reason to necessarily like stand up and check anything out. He's like right in that spot where he can just watch that doe and be checking out everything that's going on until a buck runs up to him and actually,
Do you think that he
challenges
could have
him.
just assumed you were another buck laying there the whole time?
Potentially, yeah. I mean, it seemed like there were probably several other satellite bucks that were, I would imagine, pestering him for several days right in that spot. So it probably wasn't anything
Too
too
out of
off
the
to him
ordinary.
to hear a light grunt and hear just like some movement and stuff like that. But I think that buck running up, like hearing me snort wheeze and then hearing a buck run up at him like that was
That was
enough
the
to get
final
him to like
straw,
stand up
yeah.
and be like, whoa. Yeah. That was probably the wildest rut story that I've had. I remember when we were doing that like a week before that, we did that rut stories
Yeah.
podcast together, and that would have been my story had that happened.
That's awesome. Yeah. What are some of your biggest takeaways as far as just overall picture? I mean, anything from habitat to, the setup, shot, all that stuff. What are your biggest takeaways?
I think, I mean, from the habitat side of things, I like just doing that massive, large scale disturbance like that for like several years in a row, and just doing this whole reset to like the taking the entire invasive shrub layer out, which is what the entire shrub layer was, and introducing plants that are growing on the ground, like things that are giving deer a reason to be there for a lot longer rather than just going to the security cover. Um, it's just
Essentially, you're taking what was previously just a bedding area that was security, like you said.
mm-hmm,
You're now transitioning that to not only a bedding area but also a food source for a longer
mm-hmm.
period throughout the year. If not truly the whole year.
Yeah, it's just introducing that something that they didn't have within that spot that gives them a reason to be able to use it year round and throughout the day, but it still has the security cover aspect to it because there's still slash and all that stuff that's created from doing that disturbance. And then also just the way that ridge sets up, being this isolated high point ridge, they're going to use it for that reason anyways.
Something if I could like maybe explain it in a different term too, just like something that would have made sense to me before I even knew as much as I do about invasives or not. It's like when we're talking about this, when we talk about the invasive plant base versus the native, if you were in there scouting or hunting, it's that place where you go into it and it's like, man, there's a lot of thick in here, but you can just tell that the deer don't always use it, or from past experiences maybe that like they always go in there during gun season, but otherwise they're not really in that spot. Maybe a couple of does use it as a bedding area, but it's not as
Mm-hmm.
a. And the reason that we talk about this so much, and like a lot of off-season stuff coming up, I'm sure we'll talk more about the habitat stuff, but the reason we talk about this is you can really maximize your carrying capacity, and ultimately that's going to bring bucks. I mean, you hear whitetail hunters talk so much about food sources, but like this is a permanent food source, while it's not a food plot, this is something that holds deer all year, and you can actually really increase the carrying capacity. And I think that
and
that is cool.
and the usability really, yeah. I mean, it was you'd literally walk through it, and like I said, if you know what it is, it's this autumn olive honeysuckle thicket where you're crashing through stuff, and when you look at the ground, it's literally bare soil. Like there's nothing growing on the ground, and they're not. I mean, no matter how much people tell you they're eating honeysuckle, it's like they're only doing that if it's the only thing that exists. Like they're not sitting there going into that to like browse this woody browse
Right.
of stuff in there. They're, like you said, they're going in there in gun season, or there's just so many deer that does are going to make their way into there at some point and live in there. But now it's just a much more usable ecosystem at this point, and it's still got a long ways to go. Obviously, I have a lot of cool ideas for just reintroducing a lot of different things in there. I want to try to get some fire introduced into there in the next year, a couple years, and just bring this thing back because it's a really cool, unique, like kind of limestone based ecosystem where there's these little scrubby chinkapin oaks and dogwoods and more shrubby, native shrubby trees and stuff like that. But also a cool opportunity for reintroducing this old field, reverting field habitat where there's a lot more food and stuff like that for them.
Yeah. Yeah. Any other takeaways?
The one thing that I was going to say is that seeing those doe tracks in the scrape, that was something like as soon as I saw that, it was. I mean, you see that every once in a while, but it was enough. It was like it's November 12th, and there's this big open scrape, and it looks like a doe has just been walking around in here, and like pretty great sign that there's probably just a hot doe that's using this ridge going right out into this spot. There's nowhere else.
Do you
She's
have
not going
pictures or video of that?
I don't think I do. It might still exist up there, but
Well, I mean, I think that that's what I was gonna ask. I before you started was, what about confidence wise? Like as you're going into that spot, I feel like that's something that you and I both struggle with because we struggle with it when we're together. It's like, hey, we're gonna commit to this sign. Is this enough? And like sometimes just doe tracks is enough. I fresh though. That's always the thing. Like any amount of fresh sign is probably good enough to like commit to if that feels like it's your best option in the moment. Just commit to it. And I mean, we're not very good at that, bud.
yeah, and like the way that ridge sets up with there being like it's surrounded by road, so they're not like super busy roads, but they're roads on both sides of them, and it's like there's not necessarily mature bucks living up there super consistently, but where was I going with that? Just offering that usability to that to where they have more of a reason to spend more time in there. And like, I guess I was going to talk about just the confidence portion of it is like the roads have always thrown me off where I think when I was going in there, it's like I could go back to this isolated section of the property where it's just away from roads and activity. And I know there's been deer activity up in there, but I'm going to go check for extremely fresh, hot rut sign in this spot. And if I see that, then I can feel confident enough to hunt in this spot and feel like there might be a mature buck in there and not just the same fork horn doing rounds on that ridge. And that was the case.
Cool. Well,
yeah,
I have to go because I got to go to a physical therapy appointment. So I know if I open up a whole nother can of worms, we're going to go diving
way past
into it. Yeah. But I guess for people that are listening to this, Keith has a whole bunch of like examples of exactly what he's talking about. You can watch that on our podcast channel, and hopefully you guys enjoyed this. I know I enjoyed it. I'm probably biased though because you're my friend and I like hearing your hunting stories, and I like hearing more about this. Over the years, I've heard about this property a ton, so it's cool to see you finally take out one of those big jokers.
Finally pull it together.
But thanks everybody for watching and listening, and Yeah, we'll catch you on. And thanks, Keith, for, you know, coming on and telling your story, brother.
Telling my story.
All right.
Appreciate it.
Yep. See you, everyone.